The 1930s into the 1950s witnessed an amazing blossoming and expansion of artistic creativity in the black community, primarily on the south side of Chicago. Greetings, music lovers, friends, Rick Ferguson, rickfergusonmusic.com, and also in my role as co-founder and artistic director of the Musical Offering in beautiful Evanston, Illinois. I'd like to welcome you to this video based on three specific composers that were a part of the Chicago Black Renaissance movement, but then also the following generation of composers that benefited and still continue to benefit from that incredible work that took place. Chicago Black Renaissance movement was in the 1930s into about the mid-1950s or so, and was based primarily in the Bronzeville, in and around the Bronzeville neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. It was very much a literary-inspired movement, and at the heart and soul of this movement was incredible advocacy and poetry and prose by Langston Hughes. And there are three black female composers that I'd like to focus on that are very much connected to this movement and then what came after. Three fascinating personalities. First and foremost, Florence Price. Florence Price, 1887-1953, born in Little Rock, Arkansas. I've already done a rather in-depth study of the life and work of Miss Price. Specific to the Chicago Black Renaissance movement, she really had such an impact on so many other musicians of the time, and then also was a close working partner with Langston Hughes, setting a number of his poems to music, one of which we'll hear. Ms. Price, as is the case with our other two featured composers on this video, a voracious student, not just of music, but of knowledge in general. When she was young, her father had an extensive home library. She spent hours, apparently, in that library going through all manner of books, including books on dentistry. This 8, 9, 10-year-old Florence Price was reading anything that she could get her hands on. Her father, for quite a period of time, was a dentist. To me, as a teacher, I am really inspired by Miss Price's work as a music educator, first and foremost, especially in the creation of curricula, music education curricula for two historically black colleges. And here we're not just referring to college-specific music education. We're referring to kindergarten through college. Think about that, creating single-handedly an entire music education curriculum for kindergarten through college. That boggles the mind. She was also a big part of the Roosevelt administration, Works Progress administration, specifically the Federal Arts Project, where she was based in Detroit and had a number of her works played and premiered by the WPA Symphony in Detroit, later to become the Detroit Symphony, and then came back and was a real significant presence teaching composition, and then also her own music making in the Chicago scene, working very closely also with the Chicago Women's Orchestra, which was one of the real premier orchestras in America at that time. At the end of Miss Price's life, she was living in an artistic communal situation, the Lincoln House, with one of her daughters on the South Side, teaching literally hundreds of students. These students in succeeding generations have gone on to do significant work in their own rights as music educators and also performing musicians. I want to hear one instrumental example of her beautiful melodic writing, this for violin and piano, The Deserted Garden. I'm joined by my friend and colleague Rachel Brown, violin, and let's hear Florence Price's Deserted Garden. Next, I'd like to feature two of Ms. Price's songs. The first one, Travel's End, beautiful poem, beautifully written song. Poetry by Mary Falwell Hoisington. And I want you to notice not only the beautiful melodic writing for the voice, but also how Ms. Price works with the piano accompaniment to create color, to create a real specific backdrop, to color and enrich what's going on in the setting of this poem. So this is Travel's End, poetry by Mary Falwell Hoisington, and I'm joined by my colleague Sophia Heinz in this beautiful song. Enjoy. Next, we have a setting of Florence Price of a poem by Langston Hughes, We Have Tomorrow. And I find this to be not only a beautiful song, but a very hopeful song. And I love the piano part in the song, the perpetual motion, quality of the piano writing, but also the beautiful coloristic work in the background. This is an absolute joy, and we're going to hear again Sophia Heinz, mezzo-soprano. Enjoy. Next, I'd like to focus for a moment on the work and one piano example of perhaps Florence Price's greatest student, certainly her protege for years, Margaret Bonds, born in Chicago 1913, died in 1972. When she was young, Margaret Bonds' household, her mother's house, was a central gathering place on the south side of Chicago for all manner of black visual artists, writers, poets, dramatists, musicians, of course. And so the young Margaret was surrounded by these influences for years, and that very much, I believe, set her on her own artistic path. She certainly studied composition and piano with Florence Price and was one of the first black students to attend Northwestern University in 1929. However, as a student of color at that time, she was not allowed to live on campus, so she had to make the trek from her home up to the Northwestern campus on a regular basis. With her was consistently a hunger for knowledge, and for her own inspiration, she carried with her a poem by Langston Hughes. I wanted to share this poem with you because apparently it really provided so much inspiration for Margaret Bonds as a student and then later on as a professional, especially concert pianist. The title of the poem by Langston Hughes is The Negro Speaks of Rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. Incredible poetry of Langston Hughes, and Margaret Bonds also was a huge fan, obviously, of Langston Hughes' poetry and set a number of those to music herself. She was the first black soloist to perform with the Chicago Symphony in 1933, and she performed, you guessed it, Florence Price's Piano Concerto. I would like to hear an example of Margaret Bonds' piano writing, and this is her Tang American for solo piano. And I think it's such a wonderful illustration of her ability to take elements of various styles, blend them together, and create something really interesting. In this case, traditional Argentinian tango rhythms, but then with some, at that time, jazz-inspired harmonies and also a little bit of a pop music feel to it as well. So it's a subtle example of musical fusion. So this is the Tang American of Margaret Bonds. Finally, I'd like to focus on an example by somewhat the next generation of composers. Irene Britton Smith, born in Chicago in 1907, died in 1999. She was a Chicago-based pianist, violinist, composer. She published 36 works, 19 of which are for voice. She had a really interesting heritage, both black and then also Native American, I believe Crowing Cherokee Indian, and she was very interested in infusing some of her music, her own compositions, with Native American elements, in addition to other indigenous types of sounds. She was a highly educated teacher and composer and musician, attending the Chicago Normal School in 1926 for an education degree, then the American Conservatory of Music in 1943, where she studied with composer Leo Sowerby, then to the Juilliard School of Music right after the Second World War, then to the Berkshire Festival, Tanglewood in Massachusetts in 1949, and I think that this time that she spent at the Berkshire Festival really influenced her composition a great deal. We'll talk about that in a moment. Then DePaul University here in Chicago, 1956, and then she made the trek to France, to Fontainebleau, to work with Nadia Boulanger, yet another one of the Americans making the pilgrimage to Fontainebleau in 1958. So an incredible journey just of her own education and expansion. She was always very interested in finding and contributing to what she and other composers of the time were calling the Chicago sound. And I believe that influence, at least in part, not only of Florence Price, but I suspect more of Paul Hindemith, who was a fixture at the Berkshire Festival for a number of years, also worked with Ulysses Kay there. I think that influence was very prominent for Miss Britton Smith. Also a number of the French neoclassical composers, and she would have gotten an earful of that while she was working with Nadia Boulanger outside of Paris in the late 50s. Miss Britton Smith taught in the Chicago public school system for 42 years, and one of the innovations that she introduced to her own music education curriculum was the incorporation of percussion ensembles. And she had other teachers coming from all over the U.S. to view what she was doing at that time in terms of the ways that she was incorporating pitched and non-pitched percussion ensembles into her own music education curriculum, and was a real pioneer in that. I want to hear one example of Miss Britton Smith's instrumental writing. This is the third movement of her sonata for violin and piano. And it's so energetic, and I hear so much of Hindemith's influence in this movement, but it's all Britton Smith for sure. I'm joined again by my colleague Rachel Brown, violin, in the third movement of the sonata for violin and piano by Irene Britton Smith, marked Vivace. Enjoy. I hope you've enjoyed these illustrative works by these three wonderful women and such important composers and so much of a legacy, both in terms of their own composition work, but I think even more so by their work in terms of music education and how innovative each of them were in the realm of music education, which really speaks to me. But just listening to the music provides so much beautiful context. So thank you for joining me. Be sure to hit the like button. Feel free to subscribe if you don't already. Take care, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Feel fine with that?
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Gosh.
Sounds good.
Ugh. Okay. Awesome. That was really funny, though.